Thank you, Mrs. Zoom. Okay, so welcome everybody to our final info session around humanising transformation for the year 2022. And I wanted to do something a little bit different for our last session. We won't be coming together next week, but obviously we'll be kicking off in the new year with a new schedule and some really exciting topics and subjects and information to share with you all in terms of your own leadership and how you can bring humanising transformation into your own organisational work. But what I wanted to do today was I wanted to share with you a little bit of a retrospective that we did as a team. And I thought, gosh, you know, working out loud and being transparent, why don't we use this information to share with everybody on the last session on our public Wednesday webinars. So what we did as a team was we looked at all of the webinars that we've been delivering every single week in 2022, and we picked out those 12, just like the 12 gifts, the 12 days of Christmas. We looked at the 12 that were most viewed, most commented, most liked. So the ones that had the greatest deal of engagement, which, you know, we can really take on board that is probably that these are the 12 that resonate the most with everybody. And we've put them together in a wee little slideshow for you all. It's not going to be a huge session today because what I want to do is this. I want to share these 12 gifts of humanising transformation because they are your favourite things. And for all of you, just to say that we'll put together a little info pack for you all to give these 12 gifts of humanising transformation to you all together. And of course, it's important also to remember that every single session that we do, that I deliver, on humanising transformation is directly is an element that's taken directly from our framework, the Dilyn Way. So without further ado, the 12 gifts of humanising transformation. Let's go. So we shall start with number 1. And number 1 is a secret that each and every one of us should know. And this was one of my favourite webinars, actually. It's a really lovely one. So what is the secret that each and every one of us should know? And it's this: small doesn't mean slow. So we can absolutely apply loads of techniques and all of the models and methodologies around tiny little shifts in order for us to create big transformational impact. And that is so incredibly important for us to recognize. And I think what's really important about this this webinar in terms of the key messaging was this: a lot of the time when we think about small, the application of small shifts, the application of tiny little iterations, we're either thinking about agile projects and programs, or indeed we're thinking about continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is where we really apply small, tiny little shifts, incremental shifts around what we're already doing. But you can apply the techniques and models and frameworks around small, tiny shifts to transformation, to difference, to absolute transformative new and radical shifts. So it's really important for us to recognize that small does not need to mean slow. And where we work on this is looking at the ripple effect. So looking at how we can take a tiny little shift in one person and make that exponentially ripple out throughout a human system. So small is an important technique of humanizing transformation only if we are able to design the ripple out within the human system. So small shift for big impact. I think the other really important thing about small doesn't mean slow that I talked about in this session was the idea of understanding that it's not just thinking about the conscious side of a human being. So what do we need to know? What do we need to do? How can we change our decision making or make our decision making better? All of that stuff in the conscious side of our brain. And that's usually where we focus. But actually, there is an unconscious side to our brain as well, isn't there? You know, there are the habit side and small, tiny little subatomic habits. If we are able to identify them, support people to bring them into their practice, we can really change the way people think by focusing not just on conscious, what we do, how we do it, learning, skill, all of that kind of stuff, but thinking about the unconscious side as well, thinking about habits, thinking about our rituals, and we're really, really able to bring small power to transformation. And of course, the final thing about small doesn't mean slow is the way we apply it to humanized transformation, the way we apply it to who we are as a model role model, a modern role model leader. And it's the third bit that you see here. It's about creating forward, not creating from the past. So if you think about continuous improvement is about where are we and where have we been and where are we needing to go? But the focus of continuous improvement is how do we make what we've got better? How do we make where we are better, who we are now better? How do we tweak it a little bit so it makes it, we make it faster, we make it smarter, we make it better? But when we're thinking about tiny little shifts from a transformational perspective, what we want to do is we want to absolutely understand our future state. And if we understand our future state, instead of moving from here one step, what we do is we look at that future state and we reverse engineer that future state until it gets closer and closer and closer to where we are now. And that's the shift. So actually, we've created the shift from the future. We haven't created a shift from where we are now. And that is an incredibly powerful way of thinking for us in the world of humanizing transformation. And the past is something that we need to use for the measurement of shift. So we use the past to celebrate shift. So incredibly important. So that is our first little favorite thing to share with you in terms of the webinars, the info sessions that I've been giving over the last year or so. So number two, what was number two? Number two was you loved the fact that we talk about attention over time. Now, every single one of us, let's just think about it. How often do we say, I don't have time for that? Or how often have you heard people say to you in the challenge, in the face of change and transformation, but where do we have time for that? We have to do so much more with less. We are absolute slaves to time. We are absolutely obsessed with time as human beings, and more so in the world of change and transformation. So this session was all about how do we shift and pivot our thinking from time to focus and attention. And we did that through looking at attention management so that we can, as you can see on the slide here, become masters of time. So instead of trying to control time, which is absolutely ludicrous, we can't do that. Time is just constant and it's just always flowing through. We are always on a flow through time, but we can master and control where we place our focus. And we did that, and we introduced you all to the PET model. And the PET model was prioritization. How do we prioritize? And the E in the PET model was how do we start to become more conscious and manage our energy and our emotion? And there's something really important here as well with the success of transformation in energy and emotion, because it's how we show up. You know, if we come into a situation with positive energy and emotion, it is absolutely amazing how we can change the frequency of a room and potentially change the outcome of a question that we are putting and posing in to the humans within that situation. So bringing positive energy and positive emotion into all of our practice as modern leaders, I can't stress how important that is. And the research that is coming out in the area of leadership, positive relational energy and emotion is phenomenal at the moment. It's been around for over a decade, but now we are starting to really see the science and the research to back it up. And the third element of attention management was called the triggers. And we talked about how we are able to start to focus on what puts us into that fight, flight, or freeze mode when it comes to overwhelm, when it comes to distraction, when it comes to all of the things that start to take us away from focusing on what is a priority. So it's the triggers, it's understanding the triggers, it's becoming conscious of the triggers that either put us into a state of distraction, or the triggers indeed that put us into a state of attention and focus. And if we know the triggers, wow, can I tell you, the work that we do with leaders and with change teams and a workforce around triggers, rather than just getting straight into, well, this is how you should think, or this is where you need to prioritize, help everybody to understand the concept of triggering for themselves. And that is an amazing shift for humanizing transformation. So that's the second session that came up for you in terms of really resonating in your work and humanizing transformation. So number three was the session where I talked about the two biggest blocks that could slow you down in transformation. The two biggest blocks that could slow you down in transformation. And of course, the first block, which is the most incredibly obvious one, but it's the one that is glaringly obvious, that is the biggest gap, is how we just seem to fail time and time again to bring the human side of change and transformation into being. So one of the biggest blocks that I talked about in this session was understanding the human side of change, specifically in understanding the difference between people that are resistant to change and people that have an immunity to change. And the difference between the two is such that we use very, very different techniques to address those two sides of change. If we know that somebody is resisting change, we will use very particular techniques to bring them on the journey. But if we understand that somebody has an immunity to change, then we use the immunity to change model with them, and we take them on a very specific, very different journey if we are working with immunity. And immunity to change is something that doesn't necessarily get talked about a lot when we're talking about transformation and adoption and engagement and bringing people on the journey with us. It doesn't really get talked as much as it should. And every single practitioner in our training is taught to understand the immunity to change model and how to apply that for themselves and in humanizing transformation. So we really talked about that. But the other thing, which is so incredibly obvious, is safety in numbers. And there's something really interesting about transformation that slows us down, which is when we only kind of envelope a few people around us, that we're fearful of really being open and transparent and bringing people on the journey with us. And I can't stress this enough. I'm working with a customer at the moment, and we've done our observational work, and we've recognized that there are key areas of separation. There are separation within different teams, so between team versus team separation. But the biggest separation is between the leaders and the main workforce, the main workers within the department, the service area. Massive, and it's huge. And the way that the leaders are currently navigating transformation is by just bringing one or two people that they think are, really good and they get it. That's what I've heard so many times. John gets it, so we're gonna work with him. We're gonna bring him on the journey. I'm gonna have a conversation with him tomorrow and share it with him. But the key thing is, we build safety around transformation in numbers. It's not risk. And yet we think that if we open out, we are actually increasing risk. But safety is what comes with bringing things in the open and in numbers, not risk. And it's a bit of a mindset shift. There is, and also in this session, I did give everybody a third piece, which was a little bit of a bonus. And those of you that have been on my info sessions before will know that I love bonuses. I always give a little bit of an extra one if I can. And one other incredibly important one, and it's so obvious, and yet it is so often absent when we enter into a customer environment and start to understand the current state of the human side of transformation. It's number 3 here, leadership. We talk about leadership, but we do not often really understand how to bring the leaders on the journey with us. You know, for us, it's absolute mandatory imperative to learning and development or organizational development or the leaders directly to understand and bring the concept of modern leadership into the table, so that the leaders right at the very start of transformation are starting to be exposed to the narrative of modern mindset and modern leadership versus traditional mindset and traditional leadership. Just getting that narrative into conversation with the leaders is a start, but forgetting the leadership or thinking that they're too busy or they're too far away or there's too many blockers in for me, there's, you know, we'll never get the leaders on board. It's too hard for us to get the leaders on board. There's things that we can do. So, you know, it's the challenges here is don't make the challenge an excuse. What you need to do is make that challenge a project. Really, really important. So that is the 2 blocks that slow us down with transformation session that we had earlier in the year. And number 4, what's number 4? Well, number 4 that came up was the session that I talked about culture. And I don't know whether anybody was on this, but it was a really interesting one. And actually it generated a huge amount of conversation, you know, on social media and in and around, because I said that we don't work on culture. We don't talk to our customers about culture shift. When you're really in the world of humanizing transformation, and certainly each and every one of our practitioners is trained in the practice of understanding not so much culture, but community. So what we do is we talk about community. How do you foster and nurture a sense of community around your transformation, rather than what culture change do we need? And there's so many different reasons for this, but one of the most important reasons for us to understand is we, just like time, it's pretty darn difficult to manage and control culture. And actually, when we do start to manage and control culture, then I'd argue that there is an ethical implication there, because culture is something that evolves. Culture is something that comes from within out. If we look at cultures, you know, across the world and throughout humanity, culture is something that self-evolves, something that is internally part of our identity and should be allowed to organically grow and be and exist and evolve. So for us, it is a lot more ethical and absolutely more effective if we start talking about community. And especially for all of you in your own leadership practice or in the practice of transformation, thinking about community instead of culture change. How do we foster and nurture a community rather than this is the culture? We need a more open culture. Or if you've got it in your transformation strategy, our culture is open. Well, there's no such thing as a single culture. You know, how many times do we recognize that, well, the IT department, they kind of think and act differently. They've got a unique culture. And then you go over to customer service or the marketing team or the product team or, you know, the people that are in the field, the people that are on the road. Everybody's got clusters of different subcultures. So it's incredibly, incredibly difficult for us to truly change and shift culture as a lead, as an input element of transformation. So what we ought to be doing when we're thinking about design and delivery and input for humanizing transformation is to think about community. And there's two elements of community, is number one, connection, number two, feeling good. And all of that, we have the community index framework. So if anybody would like to know more about the community index framework and assessment, then just let me know. More than happy to share that with you. But community is really important, because why? We can all be part of one community. As you can see in Patagonia, it's one of the best examples of an entire organizational human system that is united as a community, a single community, but they've got so many different kind of cultures within the teams and within the department areas. Community is expansive and it's inclusive. And that is so important to the success of humanizing transformation. The next thing, as I've just hinted to in talking about community, is that instead of getting everybody unified into a particular type of culture that might have actually been designed by some people as part of a strategy, with community we can unite people. With community we can unite instead of unify. And the difference between uniting people versus unifying people is unified humans are people that are conforming, people that are like. So we don't want to get people to be like each other. What we want to do is we want to celebrate uniqueness and diversity and equality, but unite people on purpose, unite people on something that is bigger than themselves. So it doesn't matter if you've got a technology project or program that you're delivering, how can you connect it to a higher purpose so that you can unite everybody, the people that are working on the project, the people that the project is actually, the end users of the project, the practitioners and drivers of the project, all of that kind of stuff. Everybody, the suppliers, you can all have a session and say, right, this is how this particular project is connected to something bigger than us, and we all want to be united on this. Boy, if you can just do that in one session with everybody and get them united on it, do you know you're capturing hearts, not just minds? That is so important. And we're not stifling or trying to conform people into a unified way of thinking or being. I think the other thing is about community is what it does is when we start working on our concept of community design, is you always give everybody opportunity for what we call why time. Who am I? W-A-I. Who am I? So incredibly important. So give every individual the opportunity to have why time. And of course, part of community design means that you set the conditions and environment for people to feel good. Not peak performance, not super duper, not superhuman, just set the conditions for people to feel good. And when you break down what feeling good means, things like sustainability, things like well-being, things like psychological safety, things like happiness, things like basic needs, all of that conversation, all of those things that are in the social media now that we're all trying to get, who's going to own well-being, who's going to own this, that, and the other, just for us to understand what it means for us to feel good, for our users to feel good, for our employees to feel good when they come to work. What does that mean? That's powerful. Even though the two words feel quite diminutive, feeling good, but actually so powerful. And the final thing that I talked about in that info session was about belonging. And belonging is really important because community is where we are able to foster a sense of belonging. And those of you that have ever heard me talk about modern leadership always hear me talk about this. Past, present, and future is a continuum. And at any given moment, we are just moving through that continuum. We can't get off it. We're always moving through that continuum. And what we want to be doing is we want to really be understanding the past so that we can respect it, the present so that we can be consciously aware of the moment, and the future so that we're always designing for a legacy, so that we're leaving the past and the present in a better place for future generations. That's it. That is it. No methodology, no framework, no science behind it. But if we can bring that thinking into who we are as a modern leader, if we can bring that thinking into how we're designing transformation, oh boy, can you see amazing difference and power coming into success. Number 5. It was the session that I talked about anthropology and ethnography, and I shared with everybody 3 anthropological techniques that we can bring into our transformation in order to support humanizing. Now, the one thing that I will say to you here is this: the 3 anthropological techniques to humanize transformation happen at the start. They happen at the start of a project. And whenever we're on the journey of humanization transformation, what we say is, in terms of anthropology, there's no better time than now. There is no better time than now to start embedding anthropological techniques across our human systems, across the systems that we're transforming. Because if we can bring the habit of anthropology into the projects and programs, into the users who are being impacted by our transformation, that means that we're giving them that a really, really strong competency that will allow them to sustain and evolve. So the three anthropological techniques that we talked about was, number 1, building observational capacity and competency into transformation. So let's just go to understanding the current situation. So what is our as is? You know, we always get what's our as is. And what we do is we send some surveys out, or we analyze data, and we get, you know, super smart people to crunch that, or maybe a PwC or a management consultant, a McKinsey or something, to come and crunch the numbers so they can tell us what our current situation is, what our current state is. But there's something so incredibly more powerful in order for us to humanize transformation, is to build in your very beginning, your discovery stage, build in observational capacity and competency. Don't just survey people to ask them what they need. That's not observational capacity and competency. So we talked about that. We also talked about, once you can observe what is happening, people's natural habits, their rituals, their habitats, then you've got something to talk about. Then you can start people to describe. That's where surveying, that's where connection with people is really, really important, because you can help them to start talking about what's visible for them and really get them to hold a mirror up of the truth that's in front of them. What that does is it gives perspective. It gives real perspective. We're working with another customer at the moment. It's really interesting. They have a survey pulse that goes out on a regular basis every single Friday, and they do a quarterly big, massive employee survey. And all of the data that comes out of that survey is completely and utterly different to the observational data that we have gathered. So we've got a very, very big and important day where we're bringing the entire human system together next month. And what we are doing is we are going to go through description and perspective to help them to understand what is visible about their rituals and their habits versus what they think is the truth, is just their perception and reality. And that allows us to give context. That allows us then to start aligning things. So anthropological techniques in your transformation, are you building in observational capacity right at the start in your discovery phase? And what and how are you employing them afterwards? 6, and I better get a move on, hey, because it's already 6:30. Number 6, what was the 6th element? Well, it was the transformational leadership model. And this is something more recently that I talked about, but really, really interesting that this has resonated with everybody. And I really love the fact that it has, because at the end of the day, the leaders, the transformational leaders in most of our projects and programs are both the practitioners, but also the leaders that are the responsible owners and the leaders that are in senior roles, senior levels within our organization. So very, very interesting. And what we talked about is we really, really talked about 3 things. So we talked about how we are able to understand that transformation is about difference. Transformation is not about continuous improvement. Transformation is about difference. So recognizing the difference between change and transformation. We then talked about the 3 tenets in order for the 3 tenets of humanizing transformation to guide strategic focus. But most importantly, I talked about the 4M model, and the 4M model to humanize transformation is also the model that we use in our program, Transformation for Non-Transformational Leaders. So our program, Transformation for Non-Transformational Leaders, talks about these three things, but it really hones in on the 4M model. And the 4M model is, number one, mindset. Number two, moonshot. And what that means is, how do you humanize vision and strategy? We work on that at a granular level. Number three is mission orientation. So how do we bring non-obvious collaboration into the design of our portfolio, but also how do we slightly change our portfolio of projects and programs in order for them to be more mission orientated, aka hearts and minds, capturing hearts and minds, bring people on the journey with us, be inclusive. And the final one is the first thing that I mentioned today, is it's called micro shifts. So it's about tiny little shifts, understanding the power of quantum, understanding subatomic shifts, repeated and consistent, will have a profound impact on the success of your transformation. Number 7, getting people on the same page. And this was about uniting people. This webinar was about uniting people. This webinar was about adoption and engagement, and a really, really powerful and engaged Q&A in this one as well. So in this particular session, the big summary really was making sure that we, as change practitioners and leaders, understand ourselves to be at the center of transformation, and therefore participants, and therefore part of it. Not to see ourselves as separate, not to see ourselves, not even working with people, there's still a wee bit of separation, but being a part of it. So how do we actually embody some of the change and transformation for this particular project and program within our own narrative, within our own habits? How do we show up? So we become part of the transformation. We are participants, active participants, not sponsors, not external people that are nudging or doing it too. Really, really important. And also just role modeling that future moonshot in order for us to spark a flame. And I've worked with thousands of leaders over the years, and hundreds of change and transformation practitioners. And I can promise you that as soon as people start to recognize how they themselves can start role modeling different tiny little elements of the future, when they're engaging with the customer, when they're engaging with the users, when they're engaging with their stakeholder leaders, boy, can they spark flame and change the humanizing side of things. Obviously, working back from the future to stay on course, that's a little bit about create forward, measure backwards that I mentioned earlier on. Capturing hearts, you know, to win the mind. Instead of focusing on how we want to, how do we convince somebody to come on the journey with us through business cases, through statistics, through numbers, through benefits, all of that stuff absolutely works to a point. But we should be adding the heart element, the energetic, the relational, the human, the emotional. How do we capture hearts so that we can win over minds? So incredibly important in the adoption element. And a very, very simple thing for all of us, and I'm hoping that everybody is starting to embrace this now, because I do mention it a lot in my info sessions, is key language and narrative. If we are united as practitioners and in our strategy and with our leaders, if we're united on key phrases, and I do this with a lot of transformation teams, what I do is at the start of working with them in terms of helping them and supervising, best practice change and transformation within the practitioner communities, I always say, what's our glossary? What is our narrative glossary, so that we've all got a dictionary. So if somebody leaves and somebody comes on board, one of the first things they have is they get given the glossary. These are the key narrative phrases that we use. These are the key this is the key language that we're using. And we need that because that negates mediocrity. You will find in everything, and I'll be bringing this up in one of the next sessions. That was one of your favorite 12 over the year, is this. You know, when you think about specific words around what does change mean, what does transformation mean, what does digital mean, there's so many kind of key words. And if you go and ask everybody what that word means to them, you'll get a myriad of different definitions back. So we've got to negate that mediocrity. How do we do that? Unite on key language and narrative. Number 8. This is the thing. Digital transformation is flawed. Boy, was this a popular one with everybody in terms of comments and likes and shares and whatnots. Digital transformation is flawed. What are we meaning? Well, just as I have just mentioned, it's really important for us to understand that to address the digital flaw, we've got to clean up our narratives. There's too much difference. There's too much fog out there in terms of what people understand by words like digital and technology and maturity, digitization, digitalization. It's overwhelm. It's confusing people. It means for some people improvement, for some people transformation. So we really need to clean up our narratives. The other thing about the digital transformation piece is that the flaw in digital transformation tends to allow people to say, we'll lead with tech. Digital transformation is about technology, therefore we're going to make it the central thing. And then when we are making that the central thing, that will then allow us to unlock data, and then we can start being more meaningful or data driven. And then as a result of that, what are the skills that we need? What are the human system stories that we need, etc., etc. Don't make it linear. Digital transformation is quite flawed because we tend to have dropped into a linear way of designing and delivering it. We'll get the tech done, then once we do that, then we do this, then once we've done that, and then we do this. Don't get me wrong, linear journeys are important as long as they are focused on moonshot. But in this context, no, we want to be right from the very beginning, integrating and leading with human, but bringing data and tech together. So that golden triangle, and we may think that we are because we've got a golden triangle in the narrative of our strategy, but I urge everybody to just critically take an eye and look at where the transformation is currently and just see, is it linear or non-linear? Genuinely, have we got equal focus and integration between these 3 things so they're all moving together at the same time, even if there are different levels of maturity or not? We've got to spread the message courageously, as I mentioned earlier on, and I really talked about this a lot in this session. We've got to be courageously transparent, courageously authentic. Really need to be. I'm not thinking that transparency and authenticity and openness are risk factors. We want to be open by default. Also ownership, and ownership is a really interesting one. I've talked about community focus already, but there's also this sense of fluidity. We tend to think that when we put together PMOs, when we put together governance structures and structures around projects and programs of transformation, we have an ownership structure. And, in some respects, when we're thinking about controls and compliance and policy and regulation and governance, yes, and equally to all of that, but beyond, we want fluidity. And what does that mean? People can come and people can go. We need to make it easy for people to come in when needed, and people to be able to leave or just expand out if they can. So bring this sense of fluidity. And the other thing that I mentioned in this one, which is a little bit of a lark at the end of the session, was, hey, let's just go quantum. And what do I mean by that? Well, just change the narrative completely. Because if there is so much baggage in terms of what the word digital means within your organization, don't call it digital transformation. Call it something that is completely new, like quantum, and ditch the baggage. And you might have people say, but isn't that jargon? The language of business and work is changing. The language of business and work has already changed. So you can challenge people back. It doesn't have to be jargon. Number 9, 5 things to make transformation more sustainable. This was a really, really, really popular one as well. So what are the 5 things that make our transformation more sustainable? The first thing that I talked about here was understanding that everything is connected. Human with human, human with machine, human with environment. Everything is connected. Your organization, not just with your sector, but with your community, not just with your community, but with the entire planet. So just always understanding this, this push and this pull of connectivity. The other thing I talked about was the duality of sustainability. And what I talked about there was a lot of people when they work on bringing environmental sustainability goals into transformation and change or technology, what they do is they talk about impact. So how do we reduce our impact? But there is also a legacy element here as well. So I talked at length about the difference between impact and legacy and how you can bring those 2 things together. We also talked about application across the 4 Ps. And that was really, really big. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, just because of the sake of time today, let me know, or go back to that particular session. And in that session, I explained the 4 Ps. Understanding the mindset and seeking champions. That's really important for us because, at the end of the day, when we're thinking about getting people to be more environmentally aware and therefore being more environmental and more sustainable in their practice, it's about getting into how people think about it. So it's back to mindset, it's back to habits, it's back to anthropology. It's looking at where people are doing tiny little things already. So really, really, really important. The repositioning of transformation to missions, aka the 4M model. So just, obviously every one of these info sessions is directly related to the Dilyn Way framework. And what that means is you will see that there's a little bit of overlap, and that's a little bit of overlap here, as is the last one, which is small is beautiful. That's really key as well. And we've got a great masterclass coming up in the new year in our community, where we've got a fantastic regenerative expert, Neil Camp, coming to talk to us about sustainability and environment and how we can bring it into change and transformation. And one of the key things that he talks about is bringing it into the tiny little habits of your practice today. And that is one of the most powerful things. So his model around bringing sustainability and regenerative practices into transformation, on making transformation more sustainable, is all about small is beautiful. So if you are able to join that masterclass within our community, then please reach out to me and I will be able to tell you a little bit more about that. And it's free to join, so you don't need to worry about any financial impact. Right, number 10, and then we've got only a few more to go to get to number 12, the single most important element of success. Now, I've talked about it, I've eased it in, and this is the heart of the Dilyn Way framework. This is at the heart of humanizing transformation. This is the area of unique specialism that becoming a practitioner in the Dilyn Way gives you. And it's the single most important element to success. Gosh, if that isn't a no-brainer to embrace it, I don't know what is. And what is that single thing? It's mindset. It is understanding modern mindset theory. Each and every one of us, whether we are a leader in an organization or within the world of transformation, projects, programs, design, product build, whatever, we must understand modern mindset theory. That unlocks the majority of success, really understanding that. And it brings 3 key things to it, because modern mindset theory focuses on, it is about who we are, not what we do. And far too many projects and programs of transformation are more about the what than the who and the identity. Who are we becoming as a result of this versus what do we need to be doing as a result of this? So really, really important. And I think the other thing as well is that my modern mindset theory sits in between project management and change management. It is distinct from change. It is not the same as. It is an extension at best, but it is for us uniquely different. It sits and brings project management and change management together. And it also brings capability and skill down from across the organization. And when we focus on modern mindset theory, we naturally allow evolution and sustainability after the project and program are finished, after we've delivered what was on budget and on time and we've long gone. There's a legacy inside the users that we have been serving in that project or program. There is a legacy of evolution and sustainability. They are able to themselves evolve because we have worked with them to understand who they are. We have worked with them to really bring modern mindset theory into play. So much more powerful than skill and training and development, so much more powerful. So the single biggest success is mindset, which brings me to the penultimate thing, is 5 things to consider around mindset. And this was another session that came up as one of your most favorite info sessions over the last year. So 5 things to think about mindset. That thing that I said is the most important thing is, and here is these 5 things here. It is not about, is that person fixed? Growth? Is that, we want to be a growth mindset here. You don't become a growth mindset. We are all fixed and growth at any given moment. So 5 things to think about mindset, modern mindset theory, is we do not support trying to identify whether a human is fixed or growth. What we do is we focus on helping every single human understand the power of triggers. Which triggers, what triggers, who triggers, when am I triggered into either a fixed or a growth mindset? If we can understand the triggers, if we can get people to understand their own triggers, if we are able to design techniques to manage and help people to trigger from fixed into growth, to stop going into fixed as a result of triggers, boy, have you got engagement around transformation? Are you humanizing it? Absolutely powerful. Then the 7 mindsets. The 7 dimensions of modern mindset. It's not about your profile. It's not about your label. It is about your profile. And there are 7 mindsets to modern leadership, 7 dimensions to it. Digital native, the beginner's mindset, the network mindset, the open authentic mindset, the digital mindful leader, the future focused and prepared leader, and the human-centered leader. We need to be understanding and evidencing all those 7 dimensions in balance and not just outlier in 1 or 2 of them. So incredibly important. Bringing in coherence between feelings and words and actions is another really important thing that I mentioned in this session. And what I mean by that is, if you remember, if you're a part of that session, what I said was we have 3 minds. We have a mind that is in our brain. We have also neurons, mind cells in our heart, and we also have them in our stomach. So we now know that we have actually got 3 brains. And we have to make sure that they are all in coherence. When they're out of coherence, we're in overwhelm. When they're incoherent, we can't think straight. When they're incoherent, we get overwhelmed and we go into fight, flight, or freeze. So neuroscience in just the last few years has given us so many gifts to accelerate our success around transformation, if only we just see beyond the obvious. And identity trumps results always. Oh my goodness, that's so incredibly important. And the final thing that I talked about here, and if you remember, I shared the wonderful Amy Cuddy TED talk about fake it until you make it. It's all that really is talking about is repetition. consistency, tiny little repeated things, tiny little repeated evidence points, tiny little repetition of narrative, positive relational narrative. All of these things over time, repeated and consistent over time, will shift the way people think and who they are. So incredibly important. Which brings us to the final one of your 12 favorite things that I have shared with you in 2022. And it is this: 5 things that every transformation strategy needs in order to succeed. So let's finally look at these. And by the way, the 12 favorite things are in no particular order. So the final thing is about strategic. So when we're thinking about designing a strategy, when we're putting that big, massive paper together or PowerPoint slide together, think about these things. Number 1, we must always make a distinct connection between strategy and vision and purpose, aka moonshot in our language. We must always make a distinct connection between those two things, because if strategy and vision is not connected to purpose or moonshot, we will be struggling from the start, because what we will not be doing is we will not be capturing hearts and minds right at the very beginning. That is really important. The second thing is that our transformation strategies should focus on real human, not persona. And when we talked about this, what I talked about is we have got all of the technology, all of the knowledge, all of the data within our human systems. Even if we don't think we have, we've got it there. We've got all of the opportunity, the untapped potential and possibility to understand the uniqueness of the human, to design for the uniqueness of the individual human, or empower them to design their own future as part of the transformation. We do not need to rely on personas or audience segmentation. There's no need for that. We're just coming up to 2023. We can focus on the human person and not on groups or generalisms or personas. Leadership belief narrative is so incredibly important. If we have got a strategy and vision that's connected to a purpose or moonshot, the next thing for us to do is to really physically work with the leaders, the senior leaders in our organization, and to help them to build a belief narrative. And that narrative they put into their daily conversations. They adopt the belief narrative. And that is an incredibly powerful humanizing transformation strategic technique for success. And I mentioned in this session a wonderful case study of Standard Chartered and how they did something as simple as this to build a huge adoption rate in their transformation by humanizing it through the leaders adopting some belief narratives and uniting on belief narratives and putting them into their conversations and into the way that they were talking. All of them they agreed it, and then they all went out globally. And you're talking about 89,000 people in this one transformation program. Beyond obvious collaboration is absolutely important in anything that we do in humanizing transformation. And I say this all the time with leaders: always think beyond obvious. So if you want to challenge somebody around narrative, what do you mean by digital? What does transformation mean to you? Are you collaborating? What does collaboration mean to you? Who would you be collaborating with? Always challenge people on, is that beyond obvious? Are the people that you're collaborating with beyond obvious, or are they obvious people that you should just be connected with anyway on a daily basis? You know, we want to think beyond obvious on our collaboration. And always, every single transformation strategy needs to have some narrative in it, needs to have some work in it, some basic precursor exploration around future self. And what that means is having worked with the users to explore how they can see themselves in the future. And if you can include that in a transformation strategy, oh my goodness, to actually bring people on the same page, to increase adoption levels, to humanize transformation, you've got it all there in that one particular thing. And you don't necessarily at the beginning for a strategic paper need to get everybody to do it, but just get some key people to and take them through the technique of a future self workshop. You've got some real powerful things happening there. And there we go. They are the 12 most favorite info sessions around humanizing transformation that you have all highlighted in your own engagement in terms of likes, shares and comments and views over the last months of 2022. And they are all directly picked out from the Dilyn Way framework, of course, the 3 tenets, 5 profiles, 7 mindsets, the principles, and the 150 plus practice indicators. So I'm so delighted that they are the 12 that have come up. And what I'd like to say to everybody today is this. We are happy to put these 12 together into a little playbook that will be free to all of those of you that have been loyal to us over the last months of 2022 through our email list, and coming to these sessions on a Wednesday that they're going to be starting again in the next couple of weeks, in the next fortnight, to kick off 2023. So putting a little playbook together. If you'd like to receive that playbook that gives you quite an aggregated in-depth view of the framework, then please let us know and we will pop that playbook together for everybody that has been loyal to us. So a little bit of a Christmas gift from us to you to bring us to the end of the year. And I will also say that even though it is downtime for a lot of people over the next 2 weeks, I am still keeping my strategy sessions open. They are free, they are confidential. It is a 1-hour session with me. If you would like to understand a little bit more about your own sense of belonging in terms of you being a modern leader, or if you'd like to know a little bit more about the practitioner training or how you can humanize a transformation that you're leading or working within, then please do take advantage of that. And I will send that link to you all in the email with the playback of today's session. And that brings us to the end of today. It brings us to the end of our humanizing transformation sessions for 2022. It brings me to the end of today's webinar and leaves me with only 2 messages. The first message is to wish you all a wonderful end of year, and to say this from all of us at the Humanizing Transformation Leading 4D community. We wish you all health, happiness, and a hopeful, positive new year in 2023. So all the best to you all. Thank you so much for being with me today and staying on board. I know we're a couple of minutes over, but I will stop this share and just wish you all that health, happiness, and untapped potential and possibility of hope for 2023. And the replay will be with you over the next day or 2. Stay safe. Have a great festive season, and I cannot wait to see you all in 2023 and share with you some of the wonderful things that we have got planned to expand these sessions beyond just the Wednesday. So take care, everybody. And yes, I will see you very, very soon in 2023. Thank you so much. And I will hang around if anybody has got a particular question. So thank you so much, everybody. Absolutely brilliant. Take care.